Hello lovely people, welcome to another long overdue monthly movies watch video. I'm going to be talking about the movies that I watched in March 23. Starting off with, from 1994, Clerks, or Clarks, I can't remember how you say it, but this is the ultimate kind of Gen X movie really. It's all about the everyday musings of reluctant retail workers as they get through their shifts by pontificating about lots of different things such as Star Wars and other big questions of the day. It hasn't aged too well, this one. There's still quite a lot of funny bits to it, but I think I kind of view it with a tint of nostalgia really, because I think to anyone who was watching it now, they'd probably find it very offensive. There's a lot of kind of quite overt misogyny and homophobia and things like that. It stands the test of time as a well-made sort of piece of nostalgia. The acting's very hammy in it, and it does feel like a kind of student project. I know they polished it up a little bit for the second one. Haven't seen the third one yet. But yeah, that's Clerks. I'd probably give that 3 out of 4 stars. Hasn't aged too well, but still a lot to enjoy, especially for people of a certain age like me. Next is an absolute classic. I was lucky enough to go and see this live this month, or last month. It's the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's all about Brad and Janet, who two straight-laced teenagers who find themselves stranded with a flat tire on a dark and stormy night. Looking for help, they stumble upon the castle of Dr. Frankenfurter, a cross-dressing mad scientist who takes them on a journey of sexual awakening and mind-altering, gender-bending experiences. So Rocky Horror Picture Show lambasts B-movie tropes and polite society's fear of sexuality in the 1970s, mid-1970s, although not much has changed today. And it's a truly extraordinary cult horror musical, hugely influential and ahead of its time. In the same way as the Bram Stoker's Dracula projected Victorian anxieties about sexual desire into the visceral monster of a vampire, Richard O'Brien, yes, him from Crystal Maze, creates an iconic transsexual villain as a metaphor for queer culture's challenging of heteronormative norms and 1970s social mores. It turns the theatrical musical on its head and weaves in the music of glam rock, proto-punk into a format which is so subversive and cool. Tim Curry is at his absolute finest and totally iconic as the main villain. Would you call him a villain? I suppose he is a villain. And rewatching this as an adult, I enjoyed it immensely. It's a real party of a film which is instantly quotable and singable throughout, and I had to give Rocky Horror Picture Show 5 out of 5. A film that won't be ranking 5 out of 5, just to give you some spoilers, is 2018's Velocipasta. Yes, Velocipasta, you did hear that right. A preacher who has lost his faith travels to China, where he's infected by a cursed dinosaur tooth and, of course, turns it into a psychotic Velocipasta. Clearly the product of a bunch of stoners being given carte blanche to create the most wonderfully dumb idea they could fathom after one too many edibles. Very much aware of its own ridiculous premise and production, Velocipasta is a fun and funny, low-budget comedic horror, which is unwatchably cringeworthy at times, though there are definitely some open-jawed moments that you'll no doubt enjoy. I've given that 2 out of 5. I finally got round to watching the sequel to Enchanted from 2007, I believe it came out. But the Disenchanted, the sequel, came out in last year, 2022. And I've been meaning to watch it for ages, but was put off slightly by mixed reviews I'd heard. To tell you the story, Giselle and Robert from the first film moved to suburbia with a reluctant teenage Morgan and their baby daughter Sophia. Here they must take on the new evils of teen angst, competitive housewives and the drudgery of morning commutes. Giselle makes a wish to bring the magical fairy tale logic of her own world into this one, with disastrous consequences. Something chimed with me about this, the first Enchanted film. I love the way that Disney took the mickey out of themselves in that film. It's almost a parody of other Disney films, and Amy Adams is wonderfully charming in it. It's very funny, and I actually went to see it 4 times at the cinema. Can you believe? Yes, a grown man. I was 28 at the time, but yeah, just something chimed with me about the film. I can't say the same about this sequel. I was expecting it to be a lot worse, and of course it would never match up to the original. But it is good to see some of the characters return, even if this sequel lacks a lot of the uniqueness of the first film and feels rather unnecessary, I'd say. If you loved the original, you'll find certain aspects to enjoy here, but based on its own merits, it's less than spectacular viewing, and I've also given that 2 out of 5. A childhood favourite next, The Flight of Dragons from 1982. This is one of those films that I talk about often, but nobody seems to have seen it. I felt like it was on every bank holiday when I was young, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe I only saw it once and it had a lasting effect on me. An author is thrown into a world of his own creation where he must win the battle between the forces of magic and logic. One of my favourites as a kid, and I remember it being on all the time, but like I say, it might be my memory playing tricks. The animation and story are very much from their time and may leave modern audiences underwhelmed. Yet through the filter of nostalgia, I still love this timeless tale of good versus evil. Anyone who fondly remembers the classic Saturday morning cartoons of the 80s, such as Dungeons and Dragons or Thundercats, will no doubt love this too. And I've perhaps overrated this through that filter of nostalgia, but I have given it 4 out of 5 stars. I followed up the earlier Clerks with Clerks 2 or Clerks 2 from 2006. And we revisit the character Randall as his grocery store burns down. So he and his hapless friend move on to flipping burgers until he can realise his dream of moving to Florida with his girlfriend. Clerks 2 returns to familiar territory as the 20-something stoners are now 30-something stoners still bent on solving the universe's biggest questions. This time this includes topics as the blasphemy of Transformers, bestiality and pussy trolls, whatever they are. Slicker than the original, as I said, with a much bigger budget, better acting and production values. But it's still the same style of humour, incorporating overt homophobia and misogyny throughout, which still hasn't aged well. Without the nostalgic pull that the first one had on me, I struggled more with this one. If you enjoyed that first film, you'll no doubt find lots to love here, and there are certainly scenes that I found funny, particularly some of the movie references and in-jokes. But on balance, it's a mixed bag which has its moments but lacks a lot of the charm of the original, and I've given it 2 out of 5 stars. The Ruttles, All You Need Is Cash from 1978 next, a parody of the Beatles' meteoric rise to fame. It's a mockumentary from Eric Idle and Neil Innes, full of hilarious comic treats. It's so well observed and musically accurate that you can tell the makers are huge fans and talented musicians in their own right, with Neil Innes being from the Bonzo Dog Doodah band, if you hadn't heard of him already, and Eric Idle being responsible for some of the most memorable Monty Python tunes. Whilst the jokes don't land maybe as consistently as Spinal Tap and other mockumentaries of that sort, there are enough in-jokes and funny references to make this a must, especially for Beatles fans, and I've given that 3.5 out of 5 stars. 1985's Legend is next, starring a very young Tom Cruise. In the mid-80s, the action fantasy genre was super popular, with great films like Labyrinth, Neverending Story, and The Princess Bride. Many other lesser examples fared better with cult followings, such as Willow, or The Masters of the Universe, or Krull, do you remember that one? Amongst the good and the so bad they're good entries, however, is the oddity that is Legend, featuring the direction of no less than Ridley Scott and the star power of a young Tom Cruise, and a gloriously hammy Tim Curry. It should be so much better than this with those ingredients. Yeah, I'd probably place it amongst the ranks of the aforementioned Krull or Red Sonja for being a well-produced but flawed dose of camp 80s fantasy fluff. I'd give that 2 out of 5 as well. Wreck-It Ralph, the original from 2012. It feels like a new film, doesn't it? Well, it does to me anyway, but I'm getting old. It's Lonely being the video game bad guy, and Ralph decides to break his program. Tron meets Toy Story as we enter the world of video games and the everyday lives of its characters. Wreck-It Ralph is a fresh and funny take on the cartoon genre, with enough clever gaming references and fan service to keep kids and big kids like me happy throughout. I've given that 4 out of 5 stars, definitely worth watching. The penultimate film now for March, we have 2006's The Prestige. In Victorian England, 2 former magical partners become rivals after a trick goes wrong and kills one of their lovers. This leads to an obsessive journey of competition and dangerous one-upmanship. A stellar cast and a consistently intriguing plot make this a worthy fantastical drama. I liked the meta way in which the film itself was a trick, even if the payoff at the end is rather a ridiculous one. An overlong, perhaps, but enjoyable experience that is well worth a watch, and I've given that 3.5 out of 5. And last but by no means least, we have the original Muppet movie from 1979. In the Muppets' first big screen adventure, Kermit and the gang recollect how they first got together. Jim Henson's combination of anarchic, Python-esque humour and sentimental charm gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling every time, like nothing else, and this is perfect rainy day nostalgia. The story is perhaps a little more slapdash than future instalments of Muppets films, but Henson's unique heart, vision and creative use of groundbreaking puppetry techniques make this a very enjoyable experience. And the cherry on the cake is Paul Williams' wonderful musical score, which brings us such timeless classics as Rainbow Connection and Moving Right Along. There are so many fun cameos to discover throughout as well, and I have given the Muppet movie from 1979 4 out of 5 stars. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed those watches for March 23. I'd love to hear what you've been watching and any recommendations for films I should watch in the future. As always, thanks so much for watching and take care.